Today we're meeting John Grant, a consultant and an international man of mystery. At least that's how he describes himself. We'll hear more from him in a minute, but we thought he would offer us some really interesting insights into this particular way of working. So what are you observing in your travels? What are you observing about?
Well, it's interesting in my travels because the current economic downturn is a particularly European. The UK seems to become the new Japan. It seems to be flatter than a flat thing. And it's the quietest time I've seen personally for just ad hoc consulting work, I think, since the dot-com crash.
I think a lot of people watching this will identify with feeling, quite depressed about the economy and kind of what their own prospects are going to be. But I've got this theory that there might actually be an opportunity there for people to just kind of really reevaluate.
Well, it's galvanising. I wouldn't have written any books if this stuff wasn't cyclical. I wrote my first book when I took a sabbatical and I was planning to leave my company. I wrote the second one because of that slump. I also took an MSc in psychology, which I'd always meant to do, and I worked with somebody in content which on a sustainability business, which was very formative for my thinking and what I'm doing now. And you need to have R&D phases where you're actually developing your new stuff, otherwise you will get typecast and end up repeating the same thing that you've done again with a sort of diminishing contact pool, and there's a danger of that dwindling over time. So you need, like a meadow, you need fallow periods, and it's not meadows, that's crop rotation, but you know what I mean.
I also noticed that in the book, which I should actually introduce to the readers, this has been sitting on my bookshelf since I read it cover to cover about a year ago, I think.
Very good. I'll put you in touch with my other reader. You can compare notes.
But I think one of the things that struck me about this was this whole area of kind of collaboration to kind of solve problems, whatever problems are, and listening to you talk about some of the interesting creative stuff that comes out of periods of time when all seems lost. I wonder whether the web and the way that people are readjusting to life as we know it now is going to throw up anything exciting.
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean, the web itself is the brainchild of Mahatma Gandhi and the hippies who I think that one of the heads of Sun was on the FBI's most wanted list and so forth. But there's a reason why we surf it, but there's also a reason why it intrinsically is all a bit like Wikipedia, and intrinsically Napster was one of the businesses I worked back in the day, and there is something anti-capitalist at the heart of digital. Intellectual property is a contradiction in terms in the digital world. I'd love to say that digital will create lots of jobs. It's created lots of interesting jobs, but it is has been applied in many settings as a force for efficiency. So you go from having 50,000 travel agents in America to Sabre, and that is one of the difficulties with new technologies, is they certainly obliterate some old jobs as they potentially create any new ones. I think we're at a time, this is what this book's about, and it's a sort of fumbling half articulation of this, where we're into one of those genuinely new periods of history where we have uncovered, to use digital language, a new operating system for society, and it is self-organised, and whether it's the London riots or the riots clean-up or crowdfunding or all the stuff that I mean, it's interesting to look, for instance, at the charity sector at the moment, which is a absolutely Victorian institution, and those institutions were created at a time when a previous sort of generation of industrial revolution chaos had been unleashed, and they needed to create these new city-based benevolent sort of including current corporations, the Cadburys and Bournevilles. We're now into a time when there are really good questions about the future viability of models like the corporation. I mean, we've already seen Microsoft challenged and eclipsed by the open source alternatives, and the the coder's view of open source is actually it's just better quality to have millions of people looking for bugs rather than, a few 20s of people who are on one team for one program.
And do you think that that's something that you could apply to the world where you've got people working independently? Could we sort of organise ourselves into some? Do you think we need structure?
Maybe we could play with the word together.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sort of thinking HQ together. HQ. No, absolutely. I think there's two things about it. Again, I think when you only look at the digital manifestations, you miss the cultural shift. And I genuinely think some of the earliest versions of this idea, which were descendant through the beatniks and the radicals of the 60s. It goes right back to Gandhi's idea of self-rule, which is that the governance in a society should emanate up from the family and the village and not be imposed down from the Congress or the British Raj. And it's a very efficient way of organising society if you can network. This is what Deng Xiaoping effectively did during the famine of 1974, which you'll know if you read this cover to cover. He took away state farming and created a network of village cooperatives. And it was much more productive of food, mostly because it gave the little localities, once they'd made the state quota, the ability to sell anything else that they made. It added the right sort of kind of marketisation and gave people the initiative back, gave farmers the initiative for what they grew and, to manage their own kind of farms and areas. And that sort of local... I mean, usually if you look at real cooperation, it is often quite small groups. It is quite village-like because you get lost in the bigger spaces. What digital is funny. It's like sprinkling iron filings in society because you can see stuff. That's one of the things about social media that I think makes it really special. Is you can actually see things like protests spreading between different populations and this kind of stuff. And what you can see, what people predicted was that blogging in particular would never work. And there was actually somebody came out with as soon as somebody comes out with a clever phrase, they're going to be wrong. It was, this is the Babel effect. And the proposition was when everybody's writing, nobody will read. Yes. And what it missed was the bunching of a little group of people who are interested in the stuff that I'm interested in, but then a bigger story breaks and it spreads to another village. And it's much more sort of folkloric, but it quickly becomes a 2 million person story if we're upset about something that we want changed, and suddenly the government, then we go to the petitions website and so forth. But it allows things to exist in autonomous villages, but to have this sort of franchised scale where we can do stuff together. And in some cases you want everybody in the world on the same auction site so that you can find triplet buggies or whatever speciality you're looking for that you won't find in a local second-hand shop. It's an unofficial guild of freelancers, and you gradually learn the rules when you find yourself amongst others who have this secret code. And one of its core propositions is that I should do you a favour next week, not because I expect any benefits directly back to me, but because all of us need to be doing that. There's some studies recently that have shown that this is one of the constitutional thing about networks, is that they're founded on non-reciprocal altruism, which disproved a previous thing. This was Christakis and Fowler, the famous connected digital anthropologists, and what they've said is that in evolutionary terms, going back to much earlier forms of society, to form networks, what we needed to do is have a spirit of open-handed, non-reciprocal generosity to make it work. Simply to have a core value and belief, and it's been a real education for my business partner in my startup, who came from sort of corporate ad agencies until immediately before that. He was like, well, we're meeting people and they're just helping us. 3 or 4 years ago, the fashion was just to have coffee. We had all these coffee sessions like Mind, with it be local organisers, but the idea was let's have coffee once a week. And that was when all the little informal tips and pointers and referrals and all that kind of other stuff happened. But again, it was never done, I don't think, in a spirit of I'm giving so that I expect to get back or something. I simply know that this is how we all work. We're part of a guild. I wrote about guilds, and there's the Worshipful Guild of Freelance. You have a fully functioning startup, and I have one that has at least 6 months of money and some orders, so it's a real startup. We'll see if it'll be the Google of workplace greeting, but it is But to get to this point, we've had to form you use words like multidisciplinary team, and it doesn't do justice to the extent to which you're putting together birds of not of a feather. People with entirely technical and engineering, people who think the world is a machine, people who think the world is a sort of a story, and people who think the world is a spreadsheet, and people that think the world is an image, and with such different thought and learning styles that they're almost, if you put them on a desert island, that they would certainly eat each other, make a great TV show, but actually they're not, a lot of the established corporate models have been formed by people who are quite like-minded, Swedes that quite like saving money and flat packing furniture, or engineers that like making the biggest, fastest machine in the world, a place like IBM. But actually to have, and the curse is that you are, it's the Wizard of Oz, you are all holding just small parts of what a functioning whole would be. If you're lucky, you have enough kind of insight or patience to bear being in the same room with each other long enough to achieve something. But it is difficult to work, and diversity along with necessity is probably one of the great drivers of innovation, but neither create a remotely easy life, do they?
No, they certainly don't. The scale of kind of hugely exciting days, and the next the next day it's sort of, you're down in the real dumps. Managing that kind of roller coaster of emotions is quite difficult. I found having a couple of people that I could talk to quite openly was a really good thing.
Yes.
I don't know whether you found...
You have to have a couple of pressure valves. There's a friend of mine who lives around the corner who's a sustainable designer, and I did go to her one day and just open my mouth, in Eat on Regent Street or something, and went like, for 15 minutes, which... and she said, it's amazing with all that going on that you're so calm. And I was like, I was not calm, but... and it was... that's just something for life. You need people to... and people who are that right blend of actually... it's difficult to go to somebody too close to you for that in a way, because you need them to be cool and objective, and not to give you an answer, but to help you look at it coolly and objectively, and with a bit more distance. There was one of many the wiser, the MSc I went off and did was Jungian. And one of the many sort of wise little epithets of Carl Jung was that nobody ever solves their problems. They only just look at them from slightly higher in the valley and see them in the context of a load of stuff that isn't a problem. I'd never use the word freelance. For me, freelance is a only slightly more modern and upscale word for temp. And freelance is somebody who's filling in while the art director's on maternity leave or something like that. So I tend to use words like consultant or whatever, just because, it sounds a pay grade and a dignity grade higher. It's the same thing, which is fitting into other people's agendas and doing parts of the work.
But we don't really have a collective noun for people who think like this. And
there was in the 90s the free agent. That was what Fast Company and others were trying to push the idea of, and there were other vague expressions around like open collar worker and all this kind of stuff. But
you were telling me about what the Americans call this //
Oh yeah. The // That's somebody from New York told me. It's it's called the // generation, but it's I'm a blogger / designer / social venture entrepreneur / insert chef. Whatever I'm none of those things, by the way, except for the third one, I think. But,
but quite a lot of us now are actually, doing 2 or 3 different things, or maybe more.
It's a it's almost inevitable that if you you still have to have some specialisms, but if you're not within a corporate organogram and you're told, right, so you're the head of digital policy, so you're not allowed to have any ideas, because actually we've got a department over here having ideas. You're supposed to be writing policy and so forth, and you come out in the world and you suddenly discover you're allowed to have ideas, and actually occasionally ideas are quite helpful. And out here you would simply have ideas, and you are, and you have to be, to function, you have to be your own accountant, and your own strategist and your own life coach and other stuff. You can find people to do parts of those jobs, but you have to own. You can't just leave them hoping that another department is getting on with them, in many cases. Unless you're a tennis star or something, you just have to turn up and play matches. But in most versions of what we do. I think that is a result of if you take chickens out of a shed, they tend to do things like scratch. If you take humans out of a typing pool that looks like a factory, they tend to dabble and do all sorts of things and do all the other things we're talking about. Hang out and
have a life.
Have a life. Okay. Yes.
Great.
But the life-work balance thing is not. You get a lot of both out here, but you don't sort of always get to choose in the same way to clock off at 5. And
I
stuff.
don't necessarily think it's about work-life balance, is it? Because that kind of insinuates that there's a fun part of your day and then there's another part of your day which is not fun. And I think of it more in terms of kind of doing stuff that I enjoy and I'm good at, that I will be paid to do because people value it. And there seems to be a better balance in life in doing that. And I kind of think if we all did that, we might have a very different kind of economy.
Last summer, a Swiss private bank invited me to give their investors a point of view on trends in the next 10 years. I actually didn't have writer's block. I had too much to fit in. I had books worth of stuff, and some of which I'd used and some I hadn't used. And so I think if you simply decide to have productive days and find ways of working, and really professionally working, taking your work seriously, but it can be retraining or exploring new areas. Most of Web 2, I know because you're a digital person, you know all about this, and also because you go to most of the Glasshouse events. So do you remember the Last FM guys? I thought they were really interesting. They basically hit the dot-com crash, and like all of their friends, they wanted to keep their skills fresh. There was no investment money, so they simply built something for themselves, paid their coders in omelettes, and did it for once right. In rather than what investors wanted next, they actually built something that they thought people would really use. I tend to take any periods which aren't, because sometimes I have 8 days of consulting work a week, and then I go hallelujah, sort of watch the bank account charging up, make sure I get some sleep, and have some sort of life outside that. But broadly speaking, you get those periods as well, even in times like this where you just get one big contract and you're a small guy. But if other times I just go, well, I'm going to be productive anyway, and and I've always got I think that's one of the key things. I think this life suits people who've got more pet projects than they've got time. Because if you always have stuff that you'd love to be doing, if you just had time, as soon as something opens up, then you have time. And I know you do have to focus sufficiently on the stuff that does pay the bills, because at some level, the first thing I did when I went freelance was earn what I call break your leg money. I basically had frittered around in advertising. The whole St. Luke's models was predicated on having very little personal wealth out of it, and so I spent 2 years working intensively enough that I could afford to break my leg, and I wouldn't have to sort of literally hobble back into a corporate job, and to build up a reserve of savings so that I could be a little bit chilled. I'm as worried as the next person that the economy might go and never come back, although that will ask such larger questions than sort of personal career. But I think if you can work past that sort of initial anxiety, and most people actually, the first 6 months for most people, even when going independent, as you can call it, is forced by redundancy or change of things, there's usually some kind of existing network or contact, or a lot of people end up consulting to the people doing their old job or so forth. There's usually some reserve that you can use to get forward the first bit. I think the thing that I've learned to do most recently that I didn't took me a long time to establish is actually to back myself, to go, I believe in this idea, it may not work, but I believe in it, therefore I'm going to back myself and I'm going to pursue it, whether or not initial conversations with anybody else seem promising. I've become much more stubborn about I will beaver away. And it's not that I'll stick to things forever if they're not working, but I'll at least, if I have a really strong hunch or feeling or passion for developing something, then I will pursue it. And the other thing, it takes a long time. You get the confidence to be creative in anything but a very limited way beaten out of you in things like sort of marketing services or the creative industries, and actually simply going, I've had an idea, I think it's a great idea, and I'm going to get a group of people around me and I'm going to do it, and in this little pocket of the universe I can be the Spielberg. That took a long time to decide to adopt. And it's not, like most people, 90% of what I do isn't sitting around thinking up ideas. It's actually trying to get them to work, or trying to get the bits of them that aren't working, or trying to deal with the unravelling legacy of the stuff that wasn't working last time. I'm sort of cautiously pleased with how it's gone so far, and I'm most of my uncertainty looking forward is I'm just not sure what's left with the Western economy, or spiritually, or as societies or cultures. We just seem to be at such a productively bankrupt moment. I think a lot of us have been sitting around 5 years waiting for something new to emerge. I saw Tim Schmidt talk at a conference recently, and happened to be in the coffee queue with him afterwards. Between him and a friend of mine that I used to work with, that happens to work for Tim now, and so I got chatting to him, and I said, the trouble is, you've made me feel like joining a cult religion. The 30s I could have become a communist. There isn't an ism out there at the moment.
Maybe that's an opportunity.
I've got several thoughts in that direction. I based most of the marketing work I did for Napster on a quite interesting study of the marketing tactics of cult religions. And but no, I think a lot of us are waiting for the next idea to emerge, and the people, all we can think of doing is sort of occupy a churchyard in the city, or I'm not down there in a tent on this damn cold morning, but I think there is a large sense of the failure of some grand project or old model, and I don't know if we'll just become another Rome. We'll be living in the ruins and reusing the bricks for our houses, whilst the real action goes on somewhere else in the world. That's possible, and that could be good for us too. But
well, I think you've been tremendously interesting. You've certainly made me think about things differently, John. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Always a pleasure to rabbit on. One of my exes once said he never talks this much at home, so you've now disproved this.